Hello, everyone. It's half past, so I think we'll get started. We want to make sure we stay on time and leave plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm Hank Sway. I'm the product manager at OCLC for EZproxy and our API program. And I'm here today with Chris Palazzolo and Jesse Copeland from Emory. And we're going to tell you about how our two institutions implemented different solutions for EZproxy log analysis. Can you guys hear me okay? Is my mic distance good? All right, great. So I'm going to start with a quick overview of EZproxy, very quick, I promise. Then Chris and Jesse are going to talk about Emory's EZproxy assessment program. Then we'll switch gears and I'll give an overview of our upcoming EZproxy Analytics product offering. And then we're hoping to save about 10 minutes at the end for your questions. So what is EZproxy? EZproxy, of course, allows you to deliver content to your users seamlessly, effectively, and securely. And it does so by facilitating a single sign-on using your institution's preferred authentication method. It's been the leading access and authentication solution in the library space for nearly 20 years. And some of the key reasons that libraries prefer EZproxy is that it protects your users' identities from third parties, and it also assures library control over sensitive usage data. So some of the key benefits of EZproxy, why nearly 5,000 libraries worldwide are using it. So it is a simple solution to implement. It's often done at the library level with minimal involvement from campus IT. It puts the library in control over how that user data is shared with third parties like content providers. It also supports access to nearly all content providers, including the long tail of content providers that don't support SAML-based access. It uses existing library authentication mechanisms as opposed to requiring users to create additional accounts and so on. And finally, EZproxy logs a vast amount of usage data about what users are doing on content provider websites. So this usage data is really the foundation of our EZproxy Analytics product, as well as what institutions like Emory have done with EZproxy log analysis. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jesse and Chris to explain how it worked at Emory. Sure. So, all right, thanks guys.
Thank you, Hank. So my name is Chris Palazzolo. I'm the head of collections at Emory's main Woodruff Library, and Jesse Copeland, who is our assistant director of resource management at Woodruff. And we're going to talk a little bit about our kind of homegrown approach to leveraging the parsing of our EZproxy logs, a project which we began a few years ago. Talk a little bit about the impetus for that, why we decided to go in that direction as a method of collection assessment. Talk a little bit about the technical process for doing that. A little bit about documentation and visualization, and then we're going to look a little more at some applications that we use some of the data for, some of which are still in process, which are still exploring applications as we speak. Talk a little about some data challenges, and talk also a little bit about what we're kind of planning to do in the future in terms of development of EZproxy log interpretation and so forth, as well as applications for that in terms of actual collection management decisions for the future, right? So first I'll talk a little about the impetus for this. We, as almost every single library, has embraced assessment as a means to look at the performance of our resources and be good stewards of the funds that we have been allocated for purchasing materials on behalf of our researchers, students, faculty, and so forth. We have a relatively complex version of this at Emory in terms of budgets and where budgets come from and how they are funding different libraries. And we were looking at some other methods to understand what groups and what divisions of the library, et cetera, the university were using which resources, particularly because we were being asked by administrators about how our resources were being used and by whom. Some who were asking how their funding was being allocated and whether or not their users that they represent were getting kind of a good bang for their buck. We, of course, have been collecting counter data for many, many years. We're looking at another method. Counter data, of course, is limited in terms of how much you can actually gather about what users are doing. You know what users have done something in terms of downloading a full text article or so forth. So we're looking at a method not to replace counter, of course, but to view it as kind of an alternate data point or data points to kind of discover exactly whether or not the School of Theology versus those in the health sciences were using particular resources. An essential piece of this, which Jesse will talk about a little bit of the technical piece as well, but is important to note, is that for a lot of folks, EZproxy is obviously used for remote access. But in Emory's case is a little unique in that we also require individuals to authenticate on campus as well. This was a project from many years ago, had its own set of headaches to implement, but now it allows us to look at usage of data both on-site and off-site. All right, so I'm going to let Jesse talk a little bit about some of the technical.
I'm not built for podiums. Okay, so a little bit of a technical background, and I want to give a caveat that Chris nor I were very involved with this beyond being part of this project in general. Our library core systems team did this work, and I believe we also have, they have a presentation that they did at the 2018 Code for Lib Southeast conference, and I believe in our slides it is linked so you can see that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the technical background, just so that we are clear on what we are doing. So parsing. Parsing is analyzing a string of text, either in its natural language, computer language data structures, or and making it conform to the rules of grammar. For those of you still having nightmares from 7th grade language arts, it's diagramming a sentence, but in this case you're diagramming a URL structure. So in our case, as Chris said, we are parsing the EZproxy logs. So the parsers are the lines of JavaScript within EZparse that parse out the necessary information from the logs and puts it in a more human-readable format. Different platforms require different parsers. The parsers look at those URLs. If there's no parser for the platform, the data related to that resource will not be parsed out, and EZproxy logs cannot be analyzed at that point. So you must have a parser in order to analyze the logs. So it is essential to know that there are limitations with some vendors, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but URL structure, there are certain vendors that it's just not possible to get in-depth information. Some of the vendors you can basically get to the platform level, but you're not going to get into, say, a database or a title level, just based on how their URL is structured. And in our case, we are not, when we implement a parser for a resource, we are not going back and trying to retrospectively analyze older logs. So we do have to note when we implement a new parser so that we know at what point the data begins. I don't know if that is possible. I would assume it is because we have the logs, but it would be, the logs are a tremendous amount of data. So going back and trying to reanalyze those would take a tremendous amount of time and effort.
Let's go talk just a little bit about process and documentation, since this was a cross-team effort, and as Jesse was saying, our core systems team was essential to the actual processing of the logs, and their presentation kind of shows actually their process a little bit more in detail about how they actually add to the parser libraries and so forth that are out there. But there were we had a business case for this because it did take a lot of effort to get this off the ground, and a business case and human resource hours and capacity. And we have a key set of stakeholders from the major library collection managers as well as from electronic and continuing resources to be involved. One thing we found to be very essential that is a user manual, because as Jesse noted, there's a lot of jargon here in terms of what parsing means, when parsers were added, how this relates to counter statistics, and so forth. And we want to be very careful that those individuals looking at this data and or making decisions based on this data knew exactly what they were looking at, and you were using it in a correct manner, because I think in a lot of ways it could be misused or misinterpreted and so forth. So having documentation about that for end users, which in this case has been limited mostly to collection managers and ECR at this point in time, has been essential. There was a big process we put in for parser prioritization in terms of what materials we were most interested in looking at in terms of their use by our patrons. There was I won't go into all the details here, but this lists kind of some of the factors and criteria that we use to decide what goes in that we wanted to measure. And there's a list survey we put together, and there's a GitHub site which we all have access to as well to see when things were added, because that's absolutely essential as well to know when things were added. If you want to do any sort of comparative data over time, you must have that in place, all right? So we also do enhancements for visualization this way and so forth. And we have regular stakeholder meetings to talk about enhancements, and we'll talk a little bit about what kind of those enhancements are a little bit later in terms of future development. But that was also another very essential way to be sure that technical plus the collection side of the house and technical services were all kind of hearing the same things and sharing the same knowledge amongst ourselves. So Jesse's going to talk a little bit more about kind of the documentation, of which the user manual is kind of part of that.
So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We created several internal documents, a user manual, a data dictionary, a glossary for Tableau, which is what we're using for the interpreting the data, and Chris will show you a little bit more of that. And we also have a service level agreement. We are very big on agreements and OLAs and SLAs at Emory. The user manual kind of incorporates all of these, the data dictionary, the Tableau glossary, and a little bit of the SLA language. And the user manual was really just created to provide some guidance to the people who are using libstats, as we call it, and outline the advantages and also talk about the relationships of the different data sources. And one of these reasons, the biggest reason, which is what I wanted to emphasize here, is that we wanted to make sure that everybody knew, all of our stakeholders realize that libstats do not replace counter or other usage stats provided by vendors, that instead libstats is just yet another tool, and so we needed to make sure that we documented that and explained it clearly. What does counter do? What are libstats? What are counter stats? And that type of thing. And then these other things were just like the data dictionary was talking about what are the definitions of all these terms that we're using. And the user manual and the data dictionary were done as we were doing the project. The Tableau glossary came about just after we kind of launched the project, simply because we realized that our Tableau expert at Emory knew all the terms that she was using, but we did not. And so she created this to assist us in interpreting the data. And then the SLA, as I said, is a service level agreement, and that's just an agreement amongst several teams, for example, collection management, electronic and continuing resources, and our core systems team about who does what, who is responsible for what, and just setting up some shared expectations and providing a framework of the project ongoing so that everybody is clear as to what roles everybody plays.
Back and forth here.
I know, we are.
No, that's quite all right. That's quite all right. So as we have intimated earlier on, Tableau is our major visualization tool that we've been using, and partly that was chosen because Emory has invested across the university in Tableau. and various units and departments, and so we've kind of piggybacked upon that. There are other methods and other visualization tools that are out there, of course. But this was the best way that we felt to provide the actual information to others, to subject librarians, to collection managers, and so forth. And as Jesse mentioned, there's a whole set of jargon and language around Tableau stories and dashboards and so forth. A lot of ways to slice and dice the parsed data that we've gotten. And you can have whole courses on how to use Tableau as a visualization tool, which we won't go through here, except to note that it does allow you a lot of flexibility in looking at various views of the data. So by platform, by user group, by location of use, for example, there's a geomap even that you can use, a lot of different kind of things. And we have been adding slowly but surely more views that match up. For example, our health sciences library uses a view just for their healthcare staff, because at Emory, the healthcare staff has access to some resources, but not to all resources, and it's a little tricky sometimes to kind of determine that, but we want to see what they were using to see if we can expand access to those. So different schools have their own dashboards. The data can be filtered by elements. You can download a lot of this data. One thing to keep in mind is that this is, as Jesse mentioned, a ton of data. This is about 15 million data points, I think, right now. It's actually what we've got, and that's only over 2 or 3 years altogether. Just 2 years for really full, and we're still adding lots. We'll talk a little bit about some of the data challenges of that in terms of archiving in a moment. But there's a lot of different ways to download into CSV files, PNG files, et cetera, if you want to use it in a PowerPoint, crosstabs, you want to do further analysis on it, and so forth. But it's very flexible, and we've been working a lot with core systems, our experts, and Tableau to make this the most powerful tool we can in terms of making this data readable. Right. So this is kind of an example view of using Tableau. This is simply looking at some of our top 10 platforms for Oxford College, which is our small college off-site. So we think they're particularly using a lot of our resources, particularly electronic resources, in particular ebooks and so forth, because they have a much smaller collection than ours. So we're just kind of curious to see what they were using the most, and it cuts off a little bit of this with the heading right there, but you can see EBSCO, for example. EBSCO is one of those more problematic ones where we can't get too deep into the usage. But you can see Ithaca, being JSTOR, Elsevier, et cetera, so forth, as some of the publisher names and publication titles. And then you see all the filters you can do on the side there, which are actions, which is whether or not it's a book, a journal, article, table of contents, et cetera, the division, recorded date. This one doesn't have it on here, but you also look at student level, for example, it's a first year, second year, third year, and so forth. So all this, again, is predicated on what we can get from our data that we get from our, what do you call our LDAP, actually, which is really our localized Emory's institutional data for individual users. So in other words, you know, what school you're in, what department you're in, et cetera, and so forth. So as complete as that is what we can get, oftentimes. We can't recreate data that's not there in that. Oops. So I think Jesse talked a little bit about the data challenges, like kind of intimated just a minute ago, but there are a few more.
So there are some data challenges in what we're doing. Data archiving and retention, as we mentioned, there are a lot of points, a lot of data points. There's issues with how granular we can be because of vendors and how they construct the URLs. Yeah, so data archiving and retention, we have a couple of policies. For instance, we're keeping the EZproxy logs for 2 years, and we're keeping the data in Tableau for 5 years, but I believe that the data in Tableau, we've got some thoughts as to, you can download it into Excel, and we'll probably keep those for longer, and that's just so that if we ever decide to do any kind of longitudinal studies of the usage statistics, we'll still have them. It's just the more data points you have in Tableau, the much slower it loads. So issues around that. We have policies about data retention. So also some challenges that we came up against were anonymity. I know as a profession we are all concerned with anonymity of our users. And so we took that very seriously. The data is anonymized. There's no way to link back this data to a specific Emory ID. So we took that into account, and also who is able to actually log into the EZproxy logs is very, very limited. Chris and I do not see those. That's limited to a very small part of our library core systems group, and also just university IT can see those. Then again, as we've mentioned several times, there are some vendor and data limitations, vendor, just how they construct the URLs, also with the data, whether or not you can see what kind of action people are taking, whether it's a search or if they're downloading a full text, that varies. And for instance, just as an example, if anybody here has Canopy, Canopy, once you log in through your EZproxy, I'm assuming, you're logged in through Canopy, and then from then on, you're in Canopy, you are no longer in your EZproxy, it drops the proxy from the URL, and so once that happens, obviously nothing is being logged in our EZproxy logs. So at that point, we can basically see if somebody has looked for a title or accessed it, and then anything beyond that is, we can't log. And then the other challenge, which not so much a data challenge, was stakeholder education. As I mentioned, that was one of the reasons for a lot of our documentation, is to make sure there was a not misapprehension, but just a little bit of confusion that some people thought that this might replace Counter, and we said no. Counter does one thing. Counter tells you what you've accessed, and this is telling you who has accessed it, anonymized. So that was one of the challenges we faced.
Wrap it up. So we could have a whole session just on these applications, and hopefully one conference we will talk a little bit more about this, but I just want to start because we're very much in the early process of applying this data for kind of actual real life decision making. One project we have going on right now, which is wrapping up, is our ebook task force, and that is looking at our long-term strategy for acquiring ebooks in what fields and so forth, and how we allocate funding for that and so forth. And we are very interested in evaluation and use patterns over time. And we thought that the EZproxy data might give us some insights as to what groups on campus were more heavily using ebooks, and departments with some kind of guidance that might provide us. And we're still kind of playing around with the data a little bit. And you'll see there's some challenges with this specific data, actually, because we're missing some of it because of some of the data limitations that Jesse mentioned. So some of the data that we've been gathering, and this is just very, very elementary at this point in time, but this is just looking at about ebook use by our patron groups, ebook use by student level, and by school division. All this with some caveats of what data it includes and so forth. So again, be very explicit as to what it includes and what does not include, which vendors are included here. But again, we're just trying to get a very broad kind of understanding of our ebook use. And actually, this should say Elsevier. I'm sorry, there's a mistake right there. But this is also for our Elsevier contract that we usually use this data as well to look how healthcare or clinical side of campus is using our content, since that is such a large user of Elsevier. Seeing how that compared to some of our counter data, seeing what individuals were actually doing once they were in Elsevier and so forth on the Science Direct platform. And so we've been doing a little work on that as well. All right. We have definitely had some data challenges with the Elsevier materials as well. It kind of goes beyond EZproxy, but it's another just application that we've been kind of playing around with. All right. And you can see we have an Elsevier dashboard, for example, we've been playing around with, and this looking at what level of student is using Science Direct. You see a platform name and so forth. We can even do this at the title level and so forth, which journals and so forth. Sometimes that's an ISSN, sometimes that's actually a journal name. All right. So I'm going to mention real quick some next steps for development application, and some of these we've kind of addressed a little bit, but we're obviously always looking to enhance views and filtering of data, looking, incorporating some acquisitions, data cost, or data or cost for looking better or ROI kind of calculations. Incorporating the collection decision-making for subject librarians. How do we communicate this? Subject librarians don't have access to this right now. It's something that we feed to them on a case-by-case basis. How do we work that out about educating what this is and so forth? One thing that has happened, we had a collection management meeting in which I did do a big preview of this, for example, just to kind of get people socialized with the idea. And then expanding and applying to new areas of things like interdisciplinary research, looking by who's using what resources. We have some resources that are only used by licensed particular communities on campus. And it's been very interesting to see once we've expanded some of those, who's actually using some of those databases is very fascinating in terms of business and healthcare. And so it makes a good argument in some cases for expanding access, greater access. All right. One last thing I'll mention before we just go ahead is that there is a fuller presentation of this that we did for ACERL a few weeks ago. I believe it was in October sometime. It feels like, yeah, it feels like a long time ago already, in which we go a little bit more into some of the technical and some more of the process and documentation and a few more use case examples. And as Jesse mentioned as well, a big thanks to our core systems team who has been essential and very responsive and flexible with working with us on really making this a useful product. And that their presentation is also at Code for Lib at the Southeast Conference. That's available online as well. All right. So we'll hand it over to Hank for the OCLC approach.
All right, thanks, Chris. And there are links at the very end of the deck to the things that Chris just mentioned. So great. So I'll speak a bit about how we're tackling this at OCLC. We're coming out with a product early next year called EZproxy Analytics. And I just thought I'd go through some of the key benefits that we're going to realize through this offering here. You know, as Chris and Jesse were saying, you know, EZproxy logs quite a bit of data, but it's really trapped in these logs. So we wanted to provide a sort of full stack analytics solution that would allow you to extract that data, enrich it with additional information, and provide not only a platform for querying that data, but also for creating these data visualizations and dashboards out of the data. And we would just take care of all of the behind the scenes stuff that needs to happen for you. So through our platform, you'll be able to access out of the box data visualizations and dashboards that look something like this. So we'll be providing access to these out of the box dashboards with the product. But you'll also have the ability to create your own data visualizations and dashboards according to the use cases that you have. So starting earlier this year, we entered into a pilot process with 3 libraries in the US and 3 in Europe. Actually, Tim from University of Manchester is in the back. Give a wave, Tim. He's one of our pilot libraries. You know, we learned quite a bit working with these libraries about their different use cases for the EZproxy data, and we've used that to form some of these out-of-the-box visualizations and dashboards that we'll ship with the product. So backing up a step, you know, we're hearing about lots of different ways that libraries are interested in using the data that lives in EZproxy logs. So one of these is to demonstrate library value. You can use this data to show how much your students and faculty and staff and other stakeholders are using the content you subscribe to. You can use that data also to make more data-driven collection development decisions. You can use this data to monitor unauthorized usage of your e-resources, which is becoming an increasing concern among libraries. And finally, you can also use this data to better manage research support. So by keeping an eye on when your users are using resources, how they're getting to them, you can come up with new ways to offer services and better support them through their workflows. All right, so just to recap a few of the key ways that EZproxy Analytics will help libraries. So it allows you to make sense of that data that is kind of stuck in your EZproxy usage logs. It provides a holistic view of your e-resource subscription. So as Chris and Jesse were saying, it captures data across all of the platforms that you subscribe to, so it allows you to do really effective platform-to-platform comparisons. It also is an independent set of usage data that's logged on the EZproxy server, that's really controlled by your library. So it provides a mechanism for you to validate those counter reports that you receive from content providers. And using the out-of-the-box dashboards and other features, it allows you to really just access meaningful data in just a few clicks, even if you have a limited expertise in data analytics. You can also, if those out-of-the-box reports don't give you exactly what you need, you can create custom reports. And you can collaborate on and share these reports with your colleagues. There's a variety of ways you can export these reports and share them and collaborate on them with other users. So we've come up with a few different user scenarios here that really were derived from the experience with our pilot libraries that will kind of illustrate some of the different ways you can use the service. So the first of these scenarios is around managing research support. So let's say that you as the library, you want to be seen as a valuable resource on campus. So your head of reference or research services has asked you for a report about when users are at the peak activities for accessing e-content. So, she can figure out if she needs to adjust her staff schedules or provide different modes of support and so on. So the way you would get to this data through EZproxy Analytics is you would start at the home screen. The home screen, has some wayfinding information, and we're going to put some tutorial videos and other helpful content here. You can open up the left menu to access your dashboards. That's really kind of the jumping off point for viewing the out-of-the-box dashboards as well as creating your own visualizations that you want to do yourself. So this is a dashboard that I've created with some different visualizations around managing research support here. So just to highlight a few elements of the screen here. Getting ahead of myself here. So there's a few different indicators. You can limit the visualizations by time. There's different drop downs you can use to edit the type of data you're looking at. And you can drag and drop all the different elements of the dashboard to reconfigure them how you want to see them. So it's really a very robust platform that's provided for the data analytics here. This is zooming in on a single graph that's further down on the dashboard here. So when you hover over any point on the graph, you can see more details about that event. So this graph is showing access events over about a week of time in September here. So when I hover over that data point for September 24th, I can see that there were 1,115 access events across all of my platforms within this period. And this is broken down into, I think, 3-hour chunks here. So, if this trend continues, that tells me that this could be a peak time for research user needs. So that could be a good time to provide virtual reference or other modes of support, online tutorials, for example, that could be useful for those users. We also are providing visualizations around platform usage by resource type. So within an individual platform, you'll be able to see what types of content users are accessing there. So whether that be articles or tables of contents, reference links, search queries, and so on. And this is all done, as Chris and Jesse were saying, via parsing those URLs. And we do have some of the same limitations around providing platform level statistics versus title level. We run into that as well here. So there really is a lot of value here just in comparing that level of usage across all of your platforms. And we're able to capture that title level information for some but not all vendors here. But in this scenario, it can be really helpful just to know, what percentage of access events on a given platform are actually article events. That could indicate that either a user is successfully finding what they're looking for on that platform or they're not. So maybe that's where you want to tailor your instruction sessions. All right, the second scenario here is around analyzing collections. So let's say you have a expensive set of content that is used by a small number of faculty, but you also want to see if undergraduate or graduate students are using that content as well to better justify your investment in that content. So EZproxy, of course, and this is a capability that Emory has utilized, is capable of associating users with different groups. So when you associate a user with a group, like student, faculty, staff, it could be departments or majors and so on, that data is also captured in EZproxy Analytics, and we're able to provide these aggregate visualizations about platform usage by group and other types of usage by group as well. I should have mentioned as well that all of these visualizations here are using canned, kind of mocked up anonymized data here. But this could show you if that particular set of content is actually getting used just by that small group of faculty or if it's being used by undergrads as well. There also are, just to show some of the sharing capabilities within the platform here, so there's a variety of ways you can export these visualizations. If you want to send them as just via a link in an email, you can do that. You can also export them in a variety of formats for using in a presentation and so on. So there's quite a few different capabilities there. This is an example of the data query interface. So if you want to kind of take an even deeper dive into the data behind what's behind those visualizations, you can do that here. So in this particular example, I've run a search for all of the access events that are associated with the faculty group over the last 30 days, and I got just under 9,000 hits. And then down at the bottom here, I've selected these 5 columns to display in my search results. And I can also share this in a variety of ways, including exporting it to a spreadsheet if that's what I'd like to do, and open it in Excel and analyze the data in that platform. All right, so the last scenario here is around detecting and preventing unauthorized usage. So let's say that you've been contacted by various content providers over the last semester or so with various usage breaches, and they're saying you need to either deactivate this user account or unauthorize this IP address, or we're going to have to shut down your EZproxy IP. Obviously, this is not a fun scenario when it does happen, but fortunately, EZproxy Analytics is not only ingesting the EZproxy log files for the usage data, but we're also ingesting EZproxy's audit files, which contain security event information. So this will allow you to get at the data you need to be more proactive about monitoring and detecting unauthorized usage. So this is a screenshot of the security dashboard that we are working on here. So the dashboard will allow you to filter by event type and by country. So an event type, there's different event types associated with EZproxy's audit logs. It could be a user logging in, it could be entering a bad password, it could be a session expiring, any of those types of events. We're also using the IP address associated with each event to map that to a geographic location. So that's what allows us to do these different geography-based data points. So we're showing some quick metrics here about the number of successful logins as well as the number of login failures. And then this is kind of a heat map of where your users are geographically. So you may expect to see a concentration of activity around wherever your campus is, of course, but you may see some surprising locations as well. You can also change this is just a view of what the time-based drop-down looks like on your dashboard, so you can easily filter to different time periods just with a few clicks there as well, and it automatically adjusts all of the visualizations that appear on the screen just to that specific time. It's a pretty nifty platform. Okay, so further down on this dashboard, we're providing some different kind of data tables that can allow you to keep an eye on, how users' accounts may or may not be being compromised in this case. So we're providing just a chart that shows the overall login counts by user, and these, of course, here are anonymized. So if you're seeing a large number of concurrent sessions with a given user, that can be a sign that their account has been compromised and is being used across different regions to pirate content. I should note, just one note about personally identifiable information in the system. So there are a variety of ways that you can configure EZproxy to capture or not capture PII. So however you set up your EZproxy, that's also how the data will appear in analytics here. So you can set up EZproxy not to capture any PII at all. You can set it to anonymize usernames so they appear something like this, or you can use it to capture clear text usernames as well. Kind of depending on your library's priorities and goals, there's different and good reasons to set it up any of those ways. So we're also able to do the same for login failures by user. So if you see a huge spike in login failures by a particular user, that's an indication that a bad guy is trying to brute force guess their password. So that's a good opportunity to reach out to them and have them reset their password or whatever actions your institution's information security policy may suggest. And finally, we keep an eye out for logins from multiple geographic regions. So if within a short period of time you see that a user is accessing from Germany and the United States and Singapore and a number of other locations, that's a sign that their user account has been sold somewhere online and is no longer protected. So again, that's another good opportunity to close that security loophole, working with your information security team as you need to. All right, this EZproxy Analytics will be launching in early 2020. It will be an add-on service for the hosted EZproxy product. So if you're interested in learning more, check out oc.lc/ezp-analytics. There's also a form you can fill out there to get more information, and we'd be happy to hear from you. And then these are the links that I mentioned for Emory's additional content here. So thank you so much. I think we're just about at time here, but we would love to take a few questions as well. So.
Hi, thanks. This tool looks really cool. And you said right at the end that it's for hosted versions of EZproxy. What about libraries that host their own server? Any possibilities there? So
it's not on our roadmap at this point to provide this for standalone EZproxy libraries. In the meantime, we'd be happy to chat about some of the other benefits of moving to hosted, though. So.
And that's our situation too. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just on that question, we decided to tackle this for hosted customers because of having lots of additional challenges in terms of you as a standalone EZproxy library, getting your log files to us would require a whole separate infrastructure to do that. So setting that up just didn't seem like the route we wanted to pursue at this point, especially because libraries like Emory are pursuing their own kind of more DIY versions of this tool. So.
Perhaps you've already reported out on this at another conference, but I'd be very interested in how you move from proxy just off campus to also on campus, because that's, all the, just don't know how that's been using, what the issues are in doing that. That's something I'd like to understand better, how people have done that and what trouble they've run into, so I can avoid it when we eventually go there.
Well, so the trouble was PR. It was, yeah. So what we did was we shibbolized EZproxy. Yeah. So it just means that everybody, when they log in, it gets sent to the LDAP and back, and they're authenticated. We did it for a number of reasons. Emory does have Emory Healthcare, as well as hospitals. We were all sharing IPs. We did not share electronic resources. So that's the reasons why we did it. Some of the roadblocks that we came to were, identifying who had access and making sure that basically in the employee matrix, they basically added a field that said library authorization, yes or no. And so then we also had to identify job codes that have access And so those aren't updated that often on the university side, but they are updated on the healthcare side fairly often. And so that as new people come on, depending on their job code is whether or not they get authorization. Implementing it was a nightmare.
I'm okay with using that one.
Okay. It cut off a lot of people that shouldn't have had access, but kind of did, retirees and things like that. And so doing that, it cut, sponsored accounts it cut off, and so there was a lot of communications that we had to do with outreach with the schools, with the faculty, with the deans. Everybody in the library was basically involved. So there was that, and then there was the added problem of, as everybody knows, telling all the users, you can't just go to taylorandfrancis.com anymore. You have to start at the library website, or you have to update your bookmarks, and telling people how to do that, and making sure that they knew how to proxy something, and so.
I encourage you to write up the lessons learned about that. I think a lot of people would really like to take advantage of knowing more about the pitfalls.
Yeah, and I think more institutions are going to the authenticating both off-campus and on-campus for various reasons. At the time we did it, it's been about 3 years. And I think at the time we only could think we could only find one other institution that was doing it.
Yeah, we're also expecting that, as we're onboarding new libraries onto our product, that they probably are going to want to make some changes to how they can have their EZproxy configured, and this is going to be one of the big ones. Do they want to start capturing on-campus usage as well? Do they want to start logging additional groups that they aren't currently logging, and so on? So there may be some configuration changes you want to make to optimize your data analytics capabilities.
Well, so we have run over time, but I'm just going to speak for myself and Chris and Hank. If anybody has any other questions, I think we're all fairly easy to find. Contact information's in the slides, so if anybody has any questions or anything or wants to contact us, please feel free.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.